So Mark Roessler is our speaker today. Mark comfortably wears various hats as a visual creative and documentarian. As a writer, he has previously been a journalist and managing editor of the Valley Advocate. He has written historical fiction about the Franco-Prussian War, and most recently has been delving ever deeper and wider into the world of Frederick Law Olmsted. To date, Mark has 2 books on the subject of Olmsted, and a third is on the way, published by Levelers Press. Mark's vision for conveying a given subject is not only as a wordsmith, but as a layout designer with a highly refined photographic eye. Notably, he uses panoramic techniques of digital photography to uniquely enhance his narrative for the viewer. In addition to what you will experience in this presentation, I'd also like to encourage you to see more about his documentation of various Olmsted parks at his website, panoramals.com. Please welcome my friend, Mark Roessler.
Thank you, Neil Parks. And thank you, George, and thank you to the Amherst Historical Center for having me here. I'm here because I am passionate about Frederick Law Olmsted and have been all my life. Last November, I published this book, Fairstead, which includes a photographic tour of the house and grounds, which is where Olmsted worked and lived with his family, and also includes 2 essays. One is How Olmsted's Parks Work, and the other one is Olmsted's Lost Years. And this talk is basically going to be about Olmsted's lost years. When I was a kid, I lived north of New York City, and my parents would travel down, we'd go there often. I loved the idea that the park was built for me. And I also loved the never-ending supply of children that was always there. And we would go down to the playgrounds and the parks, and it was my favorite thing to do. As a teenager, my dad was a preservation architect, and he got to work on Central Park. During the 80s, they did a big facelift. It had been neglected for about 20 years, and my dad was part of that. And as a teenager, that got me into the history of the park, it got me in the history of Olmsted and reading his lectures. And as a teenager, I really loved Olmsted discussing what it meant to live in a democratic world, and how that was different from living anywhere else. As an adult, as Neil said, I've been a writer. I've worked for the Valley Advocate. I've been a designer of websites, not parks. But all through that, Olmsted has definitely been an influence of mine and somebody who I've pursued. Recently, in the last 10 years or so, it came to my attention that not everybody knew who Olmsted was, and those who didn't really understand him the way I did. So I got it into my head that what I wanted to do was document with my panoramic photography all of Olmsted's parks, and he did over 40 of them, so it's a large task. His sons went on with the tradition and continued building from Fairstead, and they did over 100 more parks. I'm interested in the 40. We'll get to some of the 100. And so as part of that effort, I went to Brookline and I photographed Fairstead. Let's see. And I started there because that was where Olmsted, later in life, in 83, I believe, 1883, he moved there with his family. And I wanted to sort of use this as the jumping off point of documenting everything else. So I went, and before we go any further, I'll just simply give you a quick little tour of Brookline and of by Gideon Freudman, by the way, I should have
Oh,
mentioned.
it's great with that.
So that's Fairstead. It took me about a day to photograph the grounds and the house, and it took me about 5 years to write the book. Part of my challenge with writing the book was that I needed to overcome the Olmsted myth. A lot of people know, or those who do know Olmsted know a little bit about him, and unfortunately most of it is not quite true. Here's a quick overview of the Olmsted myth if you don't know it. Olmsted and his partner Calvert Vaux were the designers of Central Park. The success of the park launched the both men into successful careers. On his own, Olmsted also designed projects like the US Capitol grounds, the White House, which is currently being redesigned as we speak, Biltmore, many universities, and the 1893 World's Fair. And many considered him the father of landscape architecture. Well, we'll get into that in a second. But so these things are more or less true, but they don't tell the whole picture. I've got another little video, it will be the last little video, but that it sort of explains the beginnings of Central Park. But in a nutshell, many people see Olmsted and his parks as a chance for people to go out and enjoy nature and to connect with nature. This is true. But there was another purpose behind the parks that most people have forgotten, which is the parks were meant for people to go out and encounter one another, and to meet strangers, and to have enriching experiences with other people. And we'll get into why this was important to Olmsted in a minute. So this is a brief video which sort of explains the origins of Central Park, and we'll launch from there into the story of what happened next. So that period is not really described by many biographers. I mean, it's mentioned, but it doesn't go into a lot of detail. And as this sign indicates, others think Andrew Jackson Downing was the father of American landscape architecture. I agree. This was a park that Olmsted and Vaux designed. It was the last park they designed together. They did it in the 1890s. And it's Downing Park in Newburgh. And it was a lifelong dream of Olmsted and Vaux to honor their mentor and the person who really came up with the idea of the American public park. I think of Olmsted's time at Central Park much more than the work of a masterpiece as Olmsted's college. He didn't go to Yale, which was where his brother went. He didn't go to college, and I think that in his late 30s, Central Park was essentially his college. And instead of graduating with honors, as we see, he got upset and quit. And he said he'd never do it again. And there were a lot of reasons for that. In addition to the fight with the controller, he had an incredible first few years of designing Central Park. His brother died, who he was very close to. He married the widow, adopted the children. His first child with the widow died. And Olmsted also got into an accident that nearly killed him and shortened one leg for his life. So there were a lot of pressures on him at the time, but the real thing that he couldn't stand was being told what to do. He knew what to do, and he didn't like being bossed around. Upon quitting Central Park, he went to the U.S. Sanitary Commission, which was a new commission set up by Lincoln. It was the Civil War was already underway, and Olmsted became the secretary of the commission, and he did important work there. It was the foundation of the Red Cross, which he helped establish, and was also the beginnings of the American Ambulance Service. And this is a picture of the wounded from the Civil War, and he really got the American Ambulance Service to be top-notch in the world and to really address the care of the wounded during the Civil War. But he only was there for 18 months. And guess what? He didn't get along with his employers. To say he didn't get along with his employers, which is what most biographers say is true, but he really didn't get. He became so ill and depressed that his family thought he was on the verge of death. So he finds this other opportunity that's in California, and he's going to be the manage a mine which is out there, which has been doing very well, and it has taken a slump, but he's going to go out there and fix it because, of course, he was a writer and a park designer. He has a lot of experience with these things. And I use this picture to just illustrate that these are the states that are at war. There's California, which is affiliated with the Northern, the abolitionists. And then there's this huge range in the middle. The Transcontinental Railroad had not yet been built. It was underway. And there was no way to get to California easy way. So what he did was he took a steamship down to Panama, took a train across Panama. He was really into the flora down there. And then he took a train, another boat up to San Francisco. And that's a picture of what San Francisco kind of looked like at that time. To be fair, there are other pictures that showed a little bit more urban and upcoming, but I think this gives a good idea of what he was facing. He did not live in San Francisco. I'll show you where he lived. He lived in Bear Valley. That's where the mines were. But he often came out to California because that's where the telegraph was, and that's how he communicated with New York, who were the owners of the park, of the mine. And he spent a lot of time in San Francisco being ghosted by the people out in New York who didn't come through, and it gradually became clear to him that he was not out there to save the mine, but rather be a scapegoat when it closed. But here's a quick view to show you where San Francisco, Bear Valley, and then Yosemite lie. You can imagine I'm playing the cello here.
Pretty far away.
Not close. And then, I'll give you a sense of where Yosemite was to him. There we go.
So the mine was in the desert, south of,
Yes, it was in a valley, in a hot, arid valley that was very, very hot in the summer. So there's Yosemite. While Olmsted was there, he began writing his third book, which was never actually published. It's part of his letters. It was published in 1990 as part of his letters. But it's called Notes on the Pioneer Expedition, and he wrote it while he was out there. And it's a fascinating read. It's a lot like reading about Olmsted as if he was dropped into the set of Deadwood. You know, everybody has 6 guns, and there's also a whole array of civilization he'd never encountered. I mean, he traveled in the South, and he'd seen slavery. He traveled to Europe. Even as a 21-year-old, he traveled to China on a ship. But he never really sort of encountered Chinese in a real way. He was seasick and stayed on the ship in China. But anyway, so he really saw this entirely different world that was out there. California had become a state in 1850 as a response to the gold rush, and there was not a lot of American presence out there. There was not law out there. It was pretty much it was the Wild West. But what he noticed in his book, he really got into this idea that all Americans are pioneers, and he loved the idea that even if you were a watchmaker, you might also be a really good bartender, and you might also really work on the newspaper. And as opposed to, say, like England, where you had what you did, and that's what you did, and that's the station you kept, Americans were very flexible. Anyway, I'm probably straying a little here from my notes. So he wrote this book on the pioneer, and I should also say that Native Americans were one of the reasons he didn't travel across the country by carriage, and that in California they were everywhere, of course, watching their lands be colonized, and as you might expect, they were treated very much as the bottom of the totem pole, to be a little dark, and they were. They lived in a camp not far from where Olmsted lived in Bear Valley, but often they would find Native Americans like living, having spent the night in their mudroom in their house, and they'd have to usher them out. So there was this strange play going on out there, which he was fascinated by, but he also saw a lot of hope. He saw democracy sort of happening there. People able to enjoy themselves without the park police observing them and maybe arresting them for whatever they were going to do. And then Vaux, I should mention, he quit at the same time that Olmsted did. He also had suffered what was basically a nervous breakdown. He sought psychiatric care, which at the time was very rare. But he got his act together, and he was working in New York, and he was begging his friend Olmsted to come back. And they have this correspondence, which is, to me, just this phenomenal, tough love exercise that lasts for about 2 years, of them really bashing it out. What happened in Central Park? Why did we come to blows? Why did this whole thing just blow up in our face? And is it possible to continue somehow? I could talk for a long time about the letters, but I've taken them all, the liberty of putting them all into a few bullet points of what they finally came to the conclusion of. The first one was that the design of the park wasn't just tangential, it was the thing. It was the reason that the park succeeded and why people had a good time and were able to behave themselves. The other one was that the police were counterproductive to the effect that they were trying to achieve in the park. Not an easy point to win with Olmsted. Vox believed that as an administrator, Olmsted was an obnoxious autocrat. He called him the czar of the police, and he noted that Olmsted bristled whenever anybody tried to manage him. But this is the big point that Vox made, and it was, again, it took a long time for Olmsted to really understand, but rather than trying to be the best administrator he could be, Vox wanted him to try to be the best artist he could be. Olmsted took this to be sort of aesthetics and, was he going to be painting beautiful? And he didn't feel that was him. He didn't feel he was an aesthetic creature. And they argued about this, but I think that what Vox was saying was you need to be a freelancer. You need to be independent. You cannot work for big governments and expect that you're going to get your work done. They need to hire you. You need to be an outside consultant and see what happens. And that is what he did. But again, this was a long discussion that took a long time. And as I was saying, gold mining was not a happy exercise for Olmsted out there, and it didn't go well. These aren't the mines he actually was charged of, but these were near Yosemite and similar kind of situation. Anyway, the funding that he was expecting for a lot of the improvements he was going to make never arrived. It got hot, he was bothered, and he did what any sane person would do. He took his family to Yosemite. But again, you've just seen the video showing how getting to Yosemite was in those days. There weren't roads there were horse paths, and it took days, and if you need to bring everything with you, and if you forgot something, yeah. So anyway, let's just go on here. So they traveled up there. They stayed at this guy who was very much the current day Grizzly Adams, who lived in the Mariposa Grove of redwood trees not far from there. They traveled from there and they finally got into Yosemite, and they stayed there for 6 weeks, which, again, biographers mention this. Oh, they were in 6 weeks from Yosemite. To me, this is, oh my God. And again, they were among the first white people to be visiting there. It had been open for several years. They went hunting, they enjoyed fishing, they walked around. There were other people sometimes came through that they would meet up with. One morning, Olmsted was waking up and doing getting his shaving going and everything, and he heard chanting outside of his tent. And he couldn't figure out what it was, so he finally went out, and he noticed that just across the waterway from where they were, several families of Indians had started camping. And they were having a morning ritual, and he got his guide to go over and listen to them and find out what they were talking about. And they were praying, and they were praying to nature. And what they did was they would gather at this place in Yosemite, and they would get weeds that they knew had a soporific effect on the fish. They would beat the water, and the fish would all bubble up to the top where they could then just pluck them out. Olmsted and his family stayed and camped next to these Native Americans for weeks. They bought provisions from them, but as he points out, that they were happy to share their provisions, but every time they gave them money, they didn't really know what to do with it and had a place to do with it. But they stayed out there, they shared the encampment, and gradually, to me, the most miraculous thing happened. His children started playing with the Native American children. This is not really ever mentioned anywhere in any of his biographies. It's in the footnotes to his letters. It's in a minor note. But his children started playing with them, and they had this incredible experience out in Yosemite. This is a picture of his children. The littlest one is his, up there. The other ones are adopted. And this boy, John Charles, is his stepson, who is going to become his partner later in life. Olmsted never worked without a partner. He was a landscape architect, but he was not an architect. And he always worked with a team of people, like I showed you with Central Park. Vox would be his next partner for about 7 or 8 years, and then sporadically throughout his life. then Richardson, the architect Richardson, that many of you probably know, and then it was John Charles Olmsted. And so, to me, the fact that they had this vacation, and Olmsted was a stepfather who had basically been a miserable bastard ever since he had adopted these kids. I mean, he, not happy with work, dragging them across the country. They had the sudden opportunity to bond, and I think that they became father and son in this trip. And John Charles. When Olmsted came back from that vacation in September, coincidentally, the governor of California had appointed Olmsted to run a team up to Yosemite to figure out how they were going to protect Yosemite. There was already people building lodges in it. There was a threat that it would sort of go the way of Niagara, which at that point was Hotel City. You couldn't see the falls unless you paid a fee. So Olmsted came back from Yosemite supercharged and excited about nature and about parks, or the idea of parks, for the first time in a long time. And this is a picture of them during the next year. The pictures I showed you of Yosemite were by Carlton Watkins, who was the photographer that he hired to photograph and share the idea of what was so incredible about Yosemite to the rest of the world. And Olmsted wrote this incredible report, which to me and to a lot of people is his return to parks, and it's the Yosemite Report. And in it, he makes this incredible declaration, which is that people who live in a democratic nation have a right to beautiful landscapes, and landscapes need to be preserved for their use. And this had never been said before, it had never been discussed before, and as others have recently said in their books and pointed out, this was the genesis of the national park movement. So if you want to think of Olmsted as just city parks, that's okay, but he really was the person who came across with the idea of parks across the nation, including national parks. In the report, he also evokes Downing, and to me, this is a big indication that he's kind of understood what Downing was saying all along in a way he hadn't before. Downing would have never advocated, for instance, for police in Central Park. But Olmsted writes this report. The report actually doesn't do wonders for him at the time. It gets shelved, it gets found later and is useful. But he's now invigorated and he's excited, and he had explored the oil business while he was there, was seriously considering becoming an oil tycoon. He explored the wine business while he was over in California, really thought that might be for him. But after Yosemite, he decided he was going back to parks. And his first big park was, when he returned, was Prospect Park in Brooklyn. Vaux had sort of sweetened the deal, gotten everybody excited. They said, yeah, let's do it, if Olmsted's part of it. So Olmsted came. If you read the report that Olmsted wrote for Central Park when he won the Greensward plan, it reads a little like if your contractor is going to do an addition to your building. It's very, very sort of, we're going to dig this ditch, we're going to build that wall, we're going to do this thing. It doesn't sing. It's a pretty rote document. If you read the one for Prospect Park, something's happened to Olmsted since then, because it reads like a sermon. It's what this park is going to do for you and for your families, and how it's going to serve generations to come. It's a beautiful document. It's a beautiful park. And so they got directly into that. They took on a lot of other work. But I also want to say that Olmsted returning to Central Park was huge for him. He left with all of these horrible feelings. He was sure that the controllers not working with his police was going to cause the ruin of the whole thing. But he came back, and lo and behold, it was super successful, super popular. The police were still there. The police lasted, I think, outlasted Olmsted, but he was not in charge of them, and he never suggested them for other parks. But what he was finding in the people who visited Central Park was, well, for instance, parents would bring their teenage girls, or younger than teenage girls, and leave them alone. They could do whatever they wanted. They could just wander the park. And he couldn't believe this for himself. He was, I'm not going to do that with my kids, but he was seeing it. Furthermore, doctors used to say, came and told them that they used to tell patients who came to them and said that the city's killing me, the doctors would say, well, you're going to have to go to the country, find a house, reside there, and then come back. Now they were saying, go to the park, spend a day in the park. So, to my mind, this is an indication that how much New York taught Olmsted about Central Park rather than vice versa. And I think that these lessons were things that he took on and imbued in all of his parks. This is not 40, but this is just a selection to give you an idea of the kind of breadth of what he did. And anytime you see a park system, that usually means multiple parks. So, and this whole list is in my book as well as a partial list of what the Sons pulled off. But he built he built all the way out to Milwaukee. He built down to Atlanta, Georgia. He built parks, and then there's a couple up in Canada. And I haven't been involved, but I'm starting to go to them. I've photographed, I think, 9 of them so far. And anyway, this is the last part of this slide, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about Amherst. This is what Olmsted was after. Again, yes, out in nature, but really what he wanted to see. If you can picture the Civil War, it might be hard for you, but the country was divided back then. And people were fighting with each other, and there was huge division. Even though the war had been won, nobody was really sure how it was going to last. And so what Olmsted did after the Civil War was decided he was going to devote himself to building parks. And yes, he did a lot of other incredible landscape architecture things, but to my mind, he created spaces where democracy could thrive. He actually, later in life, came to the idea that where the buildings start, the park ends. And since he thought of parks as democratic spaces, essentially what he was saying was, we don't live in a democratic nation unless you're in a park. And to him, he had an opportunity at one point to be nominated for vice president of the United States. He turned it down cold. For him, politics was not how you get to democracy. It was individuals meeting one another on a one-to-one basis and creating the spaces for this. I think that with the preponderance of parks these days, we forget that, and we forget that that's the purpose of them. They seem like nice places, but they're highly valuable, and I would rather see how we act and behave and feel in parks expand than parks detract and lose. And right now, if you're not worried about parks, you should be. Anyway, that's my main talk, and now I have a few minutes to sort of talk about Amherst. And I put an asterisk next to it because when I give these talks, it's always a little bit of a letdown because, yes, Olmsted did work in Amherst, but he was an artist. And as an artist, you get hired, and sometimes people like what you're going to do, and some people sometimes don't. And so we're going to go through a couple of don'ts. The first time he came was in 1866, right after he'd returned from Yosemite. While there was a civil war going on, the northern states established these land-grant colleges. And the idea being that we needed better universities, public universities, and here we were going to get one which turned into UMass, but it was going to be an agricultural school. He was invited up, he came to Northampton, took the train to Northampton, came over. He thought it was going to be just a sort of casual meeting, but they said, no, we really want you to some advice, we want you to look over the property. So he went out to the property, looked over the property, and then learned that they'd already decided where they were going to put all the buildings. And he felt that that was why he was there, and so he felt, and you can probably all read it by now, but he felt that maybe they had wasted his time. And so sometimes I hear people saying, "Oh yeah, Olmsted designed UMass." No. He then came in '74, and he was asked to look at the commons. And he came up with this, which I think is a very attractive look. He also had tree plans, exactly what trees were going to go where. Looks nice. That's the common today. I don't think you can really say that his idea took hold. But he did definitely come here. The later he came, I forgot when this was. I think it was a little later than actually I think it was before the comment, but you'll see why I chose this last. Anyway, he came to Amherst College, he consulted, and his plans were, again, not really used, but he did have this amazing, to me, statement, which was that at the time, he felt that Amherst was really focused on the Connecticut River, and that a lot of the construction was facing that. And if you think of the hill along here, with the octagon and everything, the college was really thinking towards the river as well. And now that there was a train, when Olmsted was there, which we all know where the train station is, he felt that the town was starting to turn towards the train and away from the river. And he really urged Amherst College to stop thinking of that roadway as their focus, but to build a campus, to build in and away from that, and to be more in relationship with the town and the town common. This plan wasn't used. His sons came later. They were invited to give talks. And I will show you, yeah. Anyway, yeah, so this is the road that he was talking about. That was the building. And he was suggesting that they build out into there, which is what happened. And it's also incidentally funny to me that Olmsted thought the octagon was junk. Get rid of it.
The what?
Didn't happen. So this is from 1905. Olmsted retired in 1895. So this is the work of their sons. This was a plan. It was a preliminary study. They weren't making any suggestions here, but you can see that. There are a lot of Olmsted plans online. I meant to get a QR code so I could share them with you. But from what I understand is that the Olmsteds were invited there often. They did a lot of work there, but it was never really picked up and accepted. But this is the clincher before we go into questions that I thought you might enjoy. They also took, in 1905, a lot of photographs. And again, there are a lot of photographs on the Olmsted. Fairstead is now an archive that's run by the national parks, and not all of, but very many of the plans and pictures that they took are available online. So that's, I think, looking north from the
It
campus.
looks like Mount Warner.
It does, but I think Mount Warner could be.
It's not Toby. That's Toby.
Yeah, that's Toby. And again, this is the just to show you that it doesn't really look like it was Olmsted's plan had ever come to be on the continent. Thank you. And if you have any questions, yes.
Did he also have a hand in the Smith College?
He did. That was designed in '93, I think. And so he did, yes.
What was the question?
Was he involved in Smith College? He was, but all of the things that happened in the '90s before he retired, he had dementia. So, as does my dad, whose birthday it is today. Isn't that an awful segue? So, yes, he was involved. Yes, he came up to the college. Yes, he looked around, but it was most likely his sons who were doing all of the really heavy lifting. And the same is true with Holyoke College, which was an Olmsted campus, but it was done by John, mostly John. And then the other Olmsted, of course, is Frederick Law Olmsted Jr., who makes my life very difficult because people are always saying, "Oh no, Olmsted, he did it, he did it." No, Jr. did it. So anyway, yes. Any other questions? Yes.
I'm a big fan of bicycle history,
Mm.
and Olmsted is sort of a villain in bicycle history.
Uh-huh.
And he didn't want cyclists in the park.
Right.
Or baseball games.
That's right.
Or anything that non-rich people wanted to do in the parks. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely, 100%, I'm afraid. The whole idea of a park, I mean, there are places to play baseball, there are places to ride your bike, but a park is meant to be a place where you escape all of that. There's no speed, there's no competition. You're able to go and sit under that tree because you want to. And really the only thing you're supposed to have to negotiate in a park are other people. And it's easy because if you want your blanket here, then they can have their blanket there. It's easy. But if you have a bicyclist who's whipping through on your walking paths, and I'm walking through taking pictures thinking this is beautiful and idyllic, and a bicycle whips past, that beautiful and idyllic thing is gone. I'm thinking other thoughts at that point. We were speaking earlier about horse carriages in Central Park. Olmsted did not want carriages in Central Park. If you look at the original Green Street plan, it's very simple and it's beautiful. And if you look at what's there currently, it's been very much changed. And a large part of that was that city controllers wanted there to be places that they could race their carriages. They loved the idea that there was going to be pavement and poof, and we can go. And so Olmsted and Vaux fought tooth and nail to get that not happen, and they lost. And I always say that Olmsted lost far more battles than he won, and he fought a lot of them. And they were over things like this that seemed like, well, geez, shouldn't we have a ballpark in the field? There's a big patch of grass. Well, if you do that, then that patch of grass is not going to be useful to anybody else while that game is going on. Quite frankly, with a diamond etched in there, nobody's going to want to have a picnic there, so the space becomes useless. He thought of his parks as passive pleasure grounds, not active pleasure grounds. And he was totally in favor of active grounds being built, but just not in his parks.
Do you think the parks would have been as successful if they had followed his vision completely?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I do. And I mean, if you look at them now, if you go to Prospect Park or Central Park now, you'll see people on their bikes, you'll see them whipping through, but the predominant thing you'll see are people relaxing, enjoying themselves. Rarely are there really baseball games going on. The fields are there, but they happen when they happen. But most of the time, people are just drinking it in. And a lot of the things that Olmsted saw were problems with Central Park, and it's a long stretch of park, and they had to have a reservoir in it, and all kinds of, he really resolved with Prospect Park. And Prospect Park, if you haven't visited it, it has a totally different feel, a different pace, and I'd say it's more successful than Central Park. All right. So sometimes I get feedback, pushback on that one. And then if you go to his other parks, of which I just listed a whole bunch of them, similarly, the ones that are the most successful, the ones that are mostly free of baseball fields, basketball courts, or if they have them, they've been really intelligently tucked in a way that doesn't interfere with other stuff. Yes?
Yeah, I had the great opportunity to visit Prospect Park for the first time ever a couple weeks ago.
Oh, yeah.
And it was and I rode one of those electric bikes, so I was speeding through. I could see everyone enjoying the park. I wanted to have more time to treat it like a park. I was with my son. We were on our way over to Greenwood Cemetery.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if you've made the connection. I was reading a little bit about the connection between the earlier Greenwood Cemetery, 1838, and the way that was designed for the dead and the living, and then how that Olmsted picked up on that somehow and brought it into his park design.
Yeah, no, that similarity has been brought up before. I mean, there's definitely, before there were parks, one of the major places you would go spend time is in a cemetery, and especially like in Europe, cemeteries were built to be pleasure grounds with with gravestones in them. But I don't believe that Olmsted was really looking at cemeteries. More of his model, his direct model was Birkenhead Park near Liverpool in England, which was a park designed by the industrialists of the area for the factory workers. And Olmsted saw that when he first went over there and blew his mind. But the key distinction between cemeteries and public parks, I think, is that cemeteries are built for profit. And they are privately owned, and you need to buy your spot there. You can go in and look if you want, but you're not going to get buried there. Your family's not going to get buried there until you have cash. Obviously, that's not the issue of the park.
Right, I was speaking more in the terms of the restorative quality of the space that they finally had outside of New York City when they opened Greenwood.
Yes, true.
And that is, people were supposedly using it as picnic grounds, and the roads were curved and
No,
cut
there were
through the
definitely those
hills,
similarities,
this
yes.
kind of thing.
And at the time, Greenwood and Prospect were so remote from downtown. I
Yeah.
mean, they were out in the boonies.
Right.
And they anticipated the growth around them.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you know if, when he was at Yosemite, if he ever met John Muir?
John Muir was after him. He did not meet John Muir.
True.
Yeah.
Also in Yosemite, what was Yosemite when Olmsted went there? It was not a national park. Was it just, who owned it?
California.
Well, it was Californian because it was, they put their, but really, nobody was there. There were some people like that, Galen Clark, who was my Grizzly Adams guy. He lived in the Mariposa, near Mariposa, and some people were building lodges there, but it had been discovered, it was being enjoyed, and there was a fear that those lodges were gonna start putting up fences and the rest of it, so that's why Olmsted was there. Yeah?
Yeah, so he designed Biltmore State Park, that's right?
He designed he didn't design the building, but yes,
Yeah,
the estate.
So how much of that did he do, that private?
He did the whole
estate?
ding-dang thing.
No, I mean, how many places did he do private estate?
Oh, I meant to bring, there's a book, there's a master list of all the projects that Olmsted and his sons did, and it's a good thick book. And private estates is by far the thickest part of it. And Amherst had several, lots and lots and lots of private estates. Holyoke is full of them. But Biltmore's obviously on a different level. Yes.
The relationship between Olmsted, Edward Dickinson, and Wildwood Cemetery, a myth?
I don't know enough about it to tell you either way. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
The theory was that Dickinson knew Olmsted and met with him, at least, but whether or not Olmsted actually came and saw the land is.
Well, I mean, as you know, he grew up in Hartford, and he knew the valley very well. He had friends in Ashfield that he would visit often, so he knew the area, and it's not impossible.
Well, Austin Dickinson was involved with Wildwood Cemetery.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Him and his brother, Austin, right?
Yeah, I don't know enough about that.
And the father was the treasurer of Amherst College.
Yes.
When I think of a park, and when I looked at all your pictures of the park, and when I hear, about that use of people sitting on blankets and sort of ambling, it's so much connected to the good weather. It's so much connected to,
Of course.
and I noticed that every park he built was in places that had, you know, significant amounts of the year in winter. Did he ever have any thoughts about those kind of limitations and how they could be overcome other than moving to Florida?
Well, I think he thought of, I think he enjoyed the seasons, and I think he thought of his parks as being multi-seasonal. And I mean, I agree with you, I prefer to be in Prospect Park on a beautiful sunny day than the dead of winter, but I don't think he really, I think that he was okay with his parks being affected by the weather and how they were used. And I mean, I guess I am guilty of shooting only in sunny days, but
I don't think you're guilty of anything, because I think a park is a wholly different proposition in January than in June.
I have to agree. I am at home working on my books in those months, and then I go out and photograph them in the other ones, yes. Yes?
Do you have any comments about the emerald necklace in Boston? What was his role in that?
Oh, his role was heavy. It was, that was his big final park. That was his ta-da! I love the emerald necklace. He moved to Fairstead in Brookline pretty much because he wanted to be near Boston. And of course, Fairstead is like a 10-15 minute walk from part of the Emerald Necklace. The biggest sadness of the Emerald Necklace is Franklin Park. And pretty much as soon as it was built, it had the most glorious meadow you've ever seen. I mean, just quintessential, like British meadow, with a brook and rolling it. Well, golf course. Bam! First American, I think the first American public golf course or something. But that happened like 5 years after it opened, and it's been there ever since. Locals are less, I'm not a golf fan. And I'm certainly not a golf fan when it's taking up public park and public space. But if you go to Franklin Park, also the zoo. And I've seen, there are zoos that have entered parks happily and been okay. Not in Franklin Park. And if you go to Franklin Park, the parking is terrible because of the zoo. And you have to walk around this great, amazing meadow because there's people playing golf there. And now there's a football stadium that was used for teenagers, for local high schoolers, and the mayor of Boston has thought that it would be good to privatize that and turn it into a women's soccer stadium. And she says it will be public on certain hours and certain days, but otherwise, and to me, if you're only public on certain hours and certain days, you're not public. So anyway, and again, not again, but she's obviously a Democrat. She's done a lot of great things about immigrants in Boston, but on this, I don't think she's winning. The city's winning. They're taking over this field, and they will take a corner of their park and make it not really public anymore. And just while we're here on the subject, if you might think if I said that there was an American president who had it out for Olmsted Parks, you might have a different person in mind than I'm going to tell you. But Obama. He built his library smack dab in the middle of a park, an Olmsted Park in Chicago. People at the time were outraged by it. They said, you gotta look elsewhere. He didn't look elsewhere. He decided that's where he's gonna build it, and that's where he has built it. And to do it, they tore down hundreds of ancient trees, and it messes with it's bad. And it's a total, to my mind, an eyesore to what was there before. So when I say that parks are in danger, it's not, I think I'm safe in saying this to this room, but it's not the Republicans. It's all of us, and we don't value parks the way that we should. And I think, given that we live in a nation that is very much divided, and maybe we'll get out of this Trump presidency alive, let's hope. but we're still going to have these divisions. And just like Olmsted was saying, get out of your houses and go to your parks, I think Olmsted today would say, get off your screens and go to your parks. Stop worrying about as much as what's happening in Washington, and worry about what's happening in your parks.
And stop regarding parks as, oh good, there's some space I can build on.
Exactly, yes. They have been built on, the parks.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you have any suggestions for Amherst in terms of parks in the future? I know there's a piece of land for sale now that would be a gorgeous park coming into Amherst. Media Center used to.
I don't know about new parks. I mean, I think that would be great. I would just say, guard what you've got, and make sure it's being used the way it's meant to be used. And also use them the way that they've been meant to be used. I mean, since deciding I was going to photograph all these Olmsted parks, I've been spending a lot of time in parks, and it's not arduous. It's really joyful. And all last year, while the country was falling apart, I was visiting parks. And yeah, I saw the country was falling apart, but I could also see that there was some really strong glue going on. And I hope you can all find that too, because it's out there and it's exciting. And yeah, that's my talk. I'm happy to, I can talk about Olmsted for a very long time, so why don't we call it quits? But if you want to keep talking.